The first production Audi built on the Volkswagen Group MEB platform for volume all-electric cars is this model, the Q4 e-tron. This aspirational mid-sized crossover is pricier, of course, than other similarly sized full battery-powered SUVs from the Volkswagen conglomerate, but it delivers a much more upmarket feel that'll help ease you into your new electrified phase of motoring ownership.
Apart from a few track-tamed versions of the R8 supercar, no Audi of the modern era has been rear-driven, but almost all Q4s will be. Have to be, because that's the drive format chosen for the MEB chassis and EV powertrain that this e-tron model borrows from the VW Group parts bin. Two flavours of this confection are offered in the mainstream Q4 range, starting with the 35 e-tron package that gives you a 170 PS electric motor mated to a 52 kilowatt-hour battery. Ideally, though, you'd want to stretch at least to the 40 e-tron model we're trying here, which has a gutsier 204 PS motor powered by a bigger 76.6 kilowatt-hour net output battery, which boosts driving range from the rather subpar 208-mile figure of the base version to a more acceptable 316-mile reading. There's also a third Q4 powertrain option which you might be able to stretch to if you limit yourself with all the extras, a 50 e-tron Quattro variant, which also uses the 76.6 kilowatt-hour battery and, as the badging suggests, offers four-wheel drive and more power. But you won't feel either of those things in day-to-day driving with it, because the additional 109 PS motor that's added to the front axle of the 50 variant is never engaged unless maximum traction is needed or you really stamp the throttle down. Should you do that in a 50 model, a 299 PS total output will be released, enough to get you to 62 miles an hour in just 6.2 seconds. That's quite a bit quicker than the two rear-driven versions. The 35 derivative manages 62 miles an hour in 9 seconds, while this 40 version takes 8.5 seconds, both being limited to a top speed of just 99 miles an hour, which seems rather 70s-like. The 50 e-tron Quattro raises that only marginally to 111 miles an hour, still not enough to go autobahn burning, and the extra motor weight that top model has to carry about drops the SUV body style model's driving range figure to 295 miles. As for battery replenishment, well, with this 40 e-tron variant charging at 125 kilowatts in ideal conditions, the battery can achieve an 80% state of charge from a 5% starting point in 38 minutes. If you're using a conventional 7 kilowatt garage wall box, a Q4 40 e-tron can charge 255 miles of range in 8.25 hours. Here we've got what Audi calls the next step in its design language for electric models, an approach heralded by the Q4 concept car the brand unveiled back at the Geneva Motor Show in 2019. A lot's changed in the world since then, of course, but the look of this Q4 hasn't. The shape characterised by short overhangs, large wheels and a surface treatment that's clear and pared back, but also intersected by super precise high-definition lines. You might struggle to call it pretty, but it's certainly striking, especially in the alternative Sportback e-tron form that offers a sportier-looking body style option for prospective Q4 folk. Right, enough with the outside, let's take a look in the cabin. It's certainly nothing like anything you'll have seen from any previous Audi. Everything on the upper level is angular, with none of the elements appearing to blend very harmoniously with each other. But it all kind of works in a contemporary, minimalistic sort of way. There's an unusual jutting lower console trimmed in smudge-worthy piano black for the neat little gear selector slider, and just above, the silver-trimmed central fascia section incorporates horizontal vents and the 11.6-inch MMI Navigation Plus central display with a sweep across the cabin that gets interrupted by this beady-browed instrument binnacle. If you've a Q4 with brake recuperation paddles, that binnacle's 10.25-inch virtual cockpit screen has to be viewed through this rather weird Cortex steering wheel with flattened top and bottom sections. Futuristic? You'd say so. Premium? Possibly, but only if you really spend some cash on a more upmarket level of trim than we have here. Right, time to take a look in the rear. The need to house the big battery under this rear bench brings with it the benefit of positioning backseat folks 70mm higher than those in the front, giving them an excellent view forward, though a little at the expense of headroom. It's also a wider cabin than you'd expect a relatively compact mid-sized SUV to be able to provide, and with no central transmission tunnel to obstruct things, 3 adults could actually fit reasonably easily into the back of this car. Let's finish with a look at the boot. Unlike in volume versions of the ID4, power assistance for this tailgate is standard across the range, and it rises to reveal a 520-litre space in this SUV model. Curiously, it's actually more in the Sportback version, 535 litres. Unless you stretch to a really pricey level of trim, the rear bench doesn't split flexibly 40-20-40 like it does in, say, that BMW iX3 we mentioned earlier, and there's no ski hatch option. Flattening this 60-40 split rear bench frees up 1,490 litres of capacity loaded to roof height. It's 1,460 litres with the Sportback body style. In surveying the VW Group MEB platform, mid-sized SUV electric vehicles launched to date, we always felt that this Wolfsburg conglomerate was leaving room for an Audi model able to deliver this engineering with a touch more polish and driver-orientated luxury. And so it proves here. The Q4 e-tron has the size of a smaller mid-sized EV, but the finish, luxury and to some extent the driving dynamics of an electric crossover from the next class up. That for larger EV models like the Jaguar I-Pace and the Mercedes EQC. In that respect, it's far more like a BMW iX3 than a Volkswagen ID4. If you're looking at those Jaguar, Mercedes or BMW models, we think you should be looking at a Q4 e-tron too, because it'll satisfy you in much the same way. If that's your perspective, the premium prices being asked here will seem reasonable. If it isn't, you'll start to question just why a car which shares pretty much every significant aspect of its engineering with comparable Volkswagen, Skoda and Cupra EVs can be worth so much more. A matter of perspective then. With Audi, 'twas ever thus. Yet, this is more than merely a mainstream product with a bit of extra tinsel. Even with the badges removed, you'd know immediately from looking at this car and sitting in it that it was a more aspirational product, and it can be customised to the tastes of richer buyers in a way that a comparably engineered Volkswagen, Skoda or Cupra model could never be. Aside from the question of price, the main issue you might have here is one of driving range, which sees this Audi lagging a little behind class leaders in this regard, or quite a lot behind in base 35 e-tron form. You can bet the engineers are working feverishly on that. And anyway, if you can afford to drop a sum as large as is required for one of these, it's almost certain that there'll be another longer-running combustion model already in your driveway. Probably another Audi, which leaves us with what? Well, undoubtedly a strong proposition. You could even call it fuel-proof.